Hey beautiful people, welcome back to Angelic Embrace, where we document and narrate the glorious and life-changing near-death experiences sent in by you guys. It is greatly appreciated. So sit back, relax, know that you are loved, and let's get into today's near-death experience story. Consider subscribing and watching to the end to find out what happens. On Friday, June 14, 2018, I was nearing the end of a very strenuous workout session. I went on a 7-mile trek, did some tough weightlifting, and then did some yoga for an hour. My right upper neck suddenly snapped, and I felt a lesser ache towards the base of my head on the left. I immediately put the weights down and tried to stretch it out since it seemed like a strained muscle. However, nothing I tried seemed to alleviate the pain, so I finally gave in and took some Tylenol before deciding to take it easy for the next few days. On Father's Day, June 16th, the pain was even worse than it had been the previous day when I woke up, and I told my wife that we needed to go to an urgent care facility to find out if there was something more serious wrong than just a pulled muscle. However, the pain continued to get worse with each passing hour. We were going to have a good time that day, and I was looking forward to spending my first Father's Day with my daughter. However, I assumed that we would celebrate Father's Day first, and then we would go on with our other plans for the day. My wife was getting ready to go while I was downstairs with the baby when I decided to take my blood pressure because the pain was becoming worse. It was pretty high, which concerned me because the pain was getting worse. At this stage, I did not experience significant levels of anxiety or fear, but I did feel apprehensive. After 10 minutes, I noticed that my eyesight was becoming increasingly blurry, and the pain was as excruciating as if a gorilla had leaped from a building and was repeatedly hitting me in the head with each beat of my heart. As my eyesight began to blur, my voice began to slur, and I slumped on the floor. I shouted for my wife to come downstairs and handed her my phone, telling her to contact 911. At that moment, I lost consciousness. The discomfort was intolerable. I had never experienced anguish on that level before, and it seemed like my skull burst before my vision went black. I had never experienced suffering on that magnitude before. I got the impression that I had passed away at this moment, or that I was at the very least far closer to passing away than I had ever been in my whole life. While I was getting ready for whatever was going to happen next, an overwhelming sense of calm came over me, and I heard a voice say, "Everything is going to be all right, just chill out." It wasn't my voice, rather, it was a voice that sounded like it belonged to an older man or a flower child from the 1960s. To put it another way, a hippie. Although I could neither see who was speaking nor could I recall ever having heard that voice before, it yet had a reassuring and familiar quality to it. I had the sensation that I was connected to both it and everything else around me, and as I began to let go of my surroundings, I had the impression that a portion of my ego had passed away. At that moment, everything that was taking place and everything that had taken place up to that point in my entire life made perfect sense to me. And then, for a split second, the anguish ceased, and I was immediately brought back to my own body and made aware of what was going on in my surroundings. I have no idea how long I was unconscious. It may have been a few seconds, but it also might have seemed like a few days. After a little while, the agony returned, but this time it was easier to bear. Although maintaining its previous level of severity, it felt as though I could simply ignore it. I was unable to move at all, and my speech was slurred, but I had complete mental clarity. I was able to direct my wife on the phone on what to say, and then I had her call a few friends and family members to come over because I knew I was going to the hospital and didn't want her to be alone. I also didn't want her to be alone because I didn't want her to worry about me. I was able to examine myself for signs of a stroke, and I did not believe that this condition was the cause of my paralysis because it affected both sides of my body, and my face did not droop as a result of it. Despite the discomfort and the fact that I was unable to move or express my ideas via my tongue, I had the distinct impression that my mind was very clear and that I was more aware of my surroundings than I had ever been in my life. In point of fact, I maintained my composure throughout it all, and I never once felt like I was in any kind of danger. After the ambulance had come, they were able to sit me up, at which point my entire body began to spasm and tremble in an uncontrollable manner. After lying on the ground for around 10 to 15 minutes, I was eventually able to rise up and go to the ambulance with assistance. During the ride in the ambulance and again when I arrived at the hospital, I experienced another episode of paralysis. I did not feel afraid, rather, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and joy that I was still alive. The initial physician who examined me suspected that I was having a panic attack, but he nonetheless sent me for an MRI and a CT scan, both of which came back negative. I had to get assistance walking to the car and then I was transported home shortly after I was discharged from the hospital. During the next few weeks, I had the impression that I had not yet returned to normal or been used to my body. I had a stutter that developed during and after that would come back if there was too much information going into my brain, as if it were short-circuiting, and going down the stairs required a lot of thought and the use of handrails. Additionally, I had a stutter that would come back if I was in a crowded room. It also required some effort on some days for me to just walk without stumbling over my own feet. I probably should not have been driving, and I ended up running a few stop signs and a red light within a few weeks of the event, so I asked my wife to take over until I felt ready to drive again. I ran into an accident within a few weeks of the event, and I ended up running a few stop signs and a red light. After a period of 2 weeks, I was able to visit my primary care physician. Nonetheless, I continued to have symptoms such as stuttering and problems walking. They promptly sent me to a neurologist, but it took us 6 months to get an appointment. By the time we met, I had fully recovered from whatever had occurred, and the neurologist diagnosed me with a complicated migraine that was producing catatonia. But in that very little moment of lying on the floor, I had a transformation in my entire perspective on life, and I believe it was a shift for the better. My life seemed to be operating on autopilot prior to the occurrence, and although I had a positive outlook on things, I was only going through the motions rather than living my life with a purpose. Before this happened, I had a tenuous relationship with religion. Nonetheless, I had been drifting away from it for some time and only sometimes went to church. Now, I just have the feeling that organized religion does nothing for me anymore, and I just started out on my own journey of self-discovery and growth, and I found that as a result, I really did like myself more, and I strive to be a kinder person to everyone else. I hope that someday I'll be able to say the same thing about organized religion. Now, I place a greater emphasis on just establishing connections with other people and developing into the greatest possible version of myself so that I can better take care of the people in my immediate environment. This tragedy has also assisted me in unearthing aspects of my history that I had been attempting to conceal and was unable to confront or share. Most importantly, the extent to which I engage in behaviors associated with imposter syndrome and self-doubt, which in turn causes me to have unfavorable thoughts and feelings. It seems that much of this derives from my upbringing, when I spent a lot of time trying to be someone that other people wanted me to be rather than just being myself. In addition, my dreams, when I do have them, are far more vivid, and I am usually able to recall the details of them quite well. Occasionally, I even have lucid dreams throughout the night. Whatever it was that happened to me in that split second when I heard that voice and fell to the ground, it seemed more real to me than anything else I had ever felt before, and as a result, I do not fear death or anything that may occur after it. My day begins with some form of mindfulness practice, such as meditation or breathing exercises, and I've cut back significantly on the intensity of my workouts so that I can put more of my energy into maintaining a healthy lifestyle and developing meaningful relationships with the people in my life. I also make an effort to find new interests and methods to see the world, as well as to appreciate the time I spend by myself. Now, take a seat, relax, and take in this subsequent account of a near-death experience. Due to a lack of oxygen, I became unconscious and eventually passed out. It was all white when I opened my eyes. There was no ground or any other tangible items to be found. I had the impression that I had been having deep talks with a person who was not present. His voice was quite soothing, and it left me with no room for uncertainty or anxiety. It appeared to me that I had been there for a very long time. He cut me off in the middle of what I was saying, and the only thing he said to me that I can remember is him asking me to wake up right now. It will be lovely. I wanted to be sure I understood what he said, so I asked him to repeat it. At that time, I became aware that I was having an out-of-body experience and that I needed to return. Hence, I made the decision to do so as quickly as possible. I sprang up in an instant and sat bolt upright in preparation to vomit. When I asked my buddies how long I had been out, they told me that it had only been around a minute, but in my brain, it felt like I had been out for a very long time.